From the depths of despair in Italy, there has been one miracle at least. At first, all rescuers could get to was a leg, but in the end, they managed to dig 10-year-old Giulia out of the rubble alive. But as the full extent of the destruction becomes clear, hope is fading that anyone else will be found alive, and there are reports tonight that at least 3 Britons have died in the quake. Also on News at 10. Hillary Clinton mounts an extraordinary attack on Nigel Farage. Is this the kind of man Donald Trump wants to be associated with, she asks?
Nigel Farage, who stoked anti-immigrant sentiments to win the referendum, Farage regularly appears on Russian propaganda programs. Now he's standing on the same stage as the Republican nominee.
He acknowledges he took more than $1 million out of the stricken BHS, but its last owner tells us exclusively he won't be paying anything back.
Will you hand back any money to
No,
BHS?
I won't.
Why not?
We were stitched up.
And on GCSE Day, the Syrian girl whose hunger for learning is nothing if not uplifting.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. As anyone who's witnessed the aftermath of an earthquake will tell you, there are things you simply can't get across on television. That weird sense as you walk down a street, there may be people still living and breathing only feet away, buried beneath the rubble. The smell of death, which after a few days can become, in truth, all-pervasive. The thought of the sheer, unadulterated terror the victims must have felt in the few seconds before the world literally collapsed all around them. The only thing that is uplifting, in fact, is the few miraculous rescues. And there have been some of those in Italy, where the death toll has now reached 250. Tonight it's become clear that 3 of them were British. One other particularly heartbreaking aspect of these stories is the number of families that are split up forever. We were told that one of the dead is a 14-year-old British boy. His parents are still alive and in hospital.
It's 36 hours since the first quake, and the aftershocks are seemingly endless. This one, measuring 5.4, brought fear to an already traumatised population and greater danger to those working through what is already damaged. And what damage? This is Pescara del Tronto. These images are of destruction on such a scale which makes them almost impossible to take in. In fact, such as damage in this small mountainside town, it looks more like a film set than somewhere people lived their lives. On the ground, it still seems unreal, and yet a closer look gives a glimpse into the lives which were lived here, and for some, lost here. Even the bishop tells me he's no words to offer comfort, relying instead on spiritual closeness, a physical closeness, and silence to help people through. There were around 1,000 people in the town when the quake struck. Incredibly, most were able to escape. So far, 45 bodies have been pulled from these broken buildings, but there are others buried deep beneath. No one knows for sure how high this death toll will rise. There are moments of joy, like when this worker shouted that he thought there was a child and called for silence. They carefully move the debris surrounding the legs of a girl that they believe is called Giulia. With words of reassurance, they carefully begin to inch her out from the rubble, which she has been trapped in for 15 hours. She is 10 years old and pulled out alive. It was a moment of hope, but there is much desperation and a feeling that the time for rescues is now past.
We use the dogs, they are looking for now in this moment, but no sign of people alive now.
For some, there's been a chance to retrieve a few belongings, abandoned as they ran for their lives.
I'm angry with God.
Angry?
Yeah, with God, I'm angry with God. And I try to think positive and to go away.
and go away is what many others will now have to do. It's unlikely these homes will ever be salvaged, and few feel particularly confident about living here now. Emma Murphy, News at 10.
As the number killed in the earthquake continues to climb, more and more individual stories of Italian victims are beginning to emerge, like that of Paola Rascelli and her husband Fabrizio. The couple were on holiday in Amatrice to celebrate her birthday. Rescuers say they found them in an embrace. One of the many children killed was Marisol Piermarini, here with her father. Her heartbroken mother had moved to the area after escaping the devastating earthquake in L'Aquila 7 years ago. Fabio Graziani and Aurelia Dalgaru were also staying with relatives. Their son was discovered alive inside their ruined home and is being treated in hospital. And Ariana Masciarelli, a 15-year-old student, had just finished her second year at art school and was spending the summer with her grandparents. They survived, but she died after the small outbuilding she was staying in collapsed. And Emma is at the hospital in Rieti tonight. Emma, news emerging all the time now about the victims of this quake.
Yes, indeed. The reports this evening that 3 British nationals were killed in Amatrice, and that we also know that others were injured. The Foreign Office won't confirm the number of deaths, but they say they are aware of a number of British people who have been caught up in the tragedy, and they have sent more consul representatives here to assist those who are needing British consul help. Now, in this hospital behind me, we understand that the parents of one of those British nationals who was killed, a 14-year-old boy, are being treated. They were brought here after the earthquake, and we understand that one of their children was unharmed, and that they are now having family members join them here to help support them. So these terrible human tragedies are becoming more and more clear as the hours pass since the earthquake.
OK, Emma, for now, thank you very much indeed. An intervention by Nigel Farage into the American presidential race last night appeared to pass off relatively smoothly after he shared a stage with Donald Trump at a rally in the United States. But his appearance, or in fact what he had to say about Mr. Trump's rival Hillary Clinton, has provoked her into a furious attack on the former UKIP leader this evening. She accused him of pushing anti-immigrant views to win the EU referendum and linked him to the extreme nationalism of Russia's President Putin.
Nigel Farage.
Nigel Farage may have been welcomed last night with open arms by Donald Trump himself, but his visit has tonight come under attack from Hillary Clinton. In a campaign speech to her party faithful, she slammed Nigel Farage, the man and the message.
Just yesterday, one of Britain's most prominent right-wing leaders, a man named Nigel Farage, who stoked anti-immigrant sentiments to win the referendum, to have Britain leave the European Union, campaigned with Donald Trump in Mississippi. Farage has called for a bar on the children of legal immigrants from public schools and health services, has said women are, and I quote, worth less than men, and supports scrapping laws that prevent employers from discriminating based on race. That's who Donald Trump wants by his side when he is addressing an audience of American voters. And the grand godfather of this global brand of extreme nationalism is Russian President Vladimir Putin.
Thank you very much.
Her attack comes just hours after he wowed a Republican rally in Mississippi.
We made June the 23rd our Independence Day when we smashed the establishment.
Billed as Mr. Brexit, he was the first to attack Mrs. Clinton.
If I was an American citizen, I wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton if you paid me. In fact, I wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton if she paid me.
He was no walk-on act last night, his politics personally endorsed by Mr. Trump.
The multinational banks, the media celebrities, the big donors tried to scare the British people. The same thing is happening right here in the United States.
And the crowds loved him. But should he be interfering in American affairs?
I've seen some of the things that he said earlier in the campaign. I thought, I really looked very sideways at some of those comments.
Which one?
The ones directed at women and some of the sort of total blanket comments that we saw about Muslim people, for example. But there was nothing he said tonight that people could find to be offensive in any way at all.
This is an American election. Should you be getting involved in American politics like this? You say it wasn't an endorsement, but
No.
it sounded like one to me.
Oh, well, I wouldn't want to tell people what to do. After all, I condemned Obama for coming and talking down to us and telling us we had to remain. I was a little bit surprised how enthusiastic Team Trump were to get me involved. It's not going to happen again.
Mr Farage may say this will not happen again, but once may be enough for a man whose entrance into American politics has only served to make the election here more divisive. Penny Marshall, News at 10, Jackson, Mississippi.
And I'm joined here by our political correspondent, Libby Wiener. Libby, there are, mostly American politicians don't even seem to know who our Prime Minister is. And here's Nigel Farage having really quite an impact. I imagine he's going to be very happy with that tonight.
Well, he's put out a statement which suggests he's actually very cross about what Hillary Clinton had to say. He said, I think Hillary Clinton is running scared. Her attacks on me are completely baseless. And he goes on, she sounds rather like Bob Geldof and can't accept Brexit. But I think you're right. In reality, he's probably extremely flattered. Not only has he been invited to speak at this Trump rally, but then the other main contender to be the next president of the United States, Hillary Clinton, lays into him, attacks him in an extraordinary manner, the language that she used. You'd think that she had enough on her plate dealing with Donald Trump rather than bringing Nigel Farage into it. But he is quite a phenomenon. After all, you have to remember that he has never been elected as an MP, but arguably has had more effect on British politics in the last year than anyone who has been elected to Parliament. Here we see him in the United States. He's not an American citizen, and he does seem to be having an impact on the presidential election there. I think it is because he is a populist leader, and he does seem to have a common touch, which Trump clearly thought would be an asset to him. But the things that he said about Hillary Clinton, saying that he wouldn't vote for her even if he was paid to, I think seemed to have got under her skin.
OK, Libby, thank you very much indeed. Now, this Sunday, the sun will finally set on a great British trading story with the closure of the last BHS stores. The man who owned the company when it went under told us today in an exclusive interview that he was very sorry it had ended that way. Perhaps not that sorry. He has no intention of handing back the £1 million or so he made from the company.
The last days of BHS, this store in York, one of just 22 that remain. And on Sunday, the company ceases trading for good. 11,000 people will have lost their jobs. 22,000 staff face the prospect of less generous pensions.
Well, I'm very sorry that it's actually ended up this way. It didn't need to end up this way, and it has done. I feel very bitter about it.
Dominic Chappell bought BHS from Sir Philip Green last year for £1, 4 weeks after a damning report by MPs labelled him a chancer. He's now responding.
MPs concluded you had your hands in the till, that you were out of your depth, incompetent and self-serving. That's pretty devastating stuff.
No, I don't accept we were incompetent at all. Myself and my team worked extremely hard to turn this company around, and we made significant inroads to do that.
This is the end of BHS. It's not the end of the investigations. The administrator is looking into how you and other directors behaved. The Serious Fraud Office is considering looking at this. Has it occurred to you that you may end up going to prison for what happened at BHS?
Well, it was a privately owned company. We did everything absolutely by the book on the way through.
So your conscience is clear, is it?
My conscience is very clear that we did the right thing right the way through.
How much money have you made from BHS? Because on the face of it, it looks like millions.
It's not millions. It's not millions by any stretch of the imagination. It costs a vast amount of money for us to get into this deal, and it's costing a vast amount of
How
money
much
now.
then?
Around £1 million.
Will you hand back any money to
No,
BHS?
I won't.
Why not?
We were stitched up. This was a company that was in far worse shape when we got into it. Philip did not stand good on his promises. Philip told us that he would sort out the pension regulator. He did not. He told us he would sort out the suppliers. He did not. The company failed because of those two issues. That's it. End of story.
I've done nothing wrong.
Back in June, Sir Philip Green told MPs he'd sold BHS to Dominic Chappell in good faith and left £400 million in the business for a turnaround. They decided he was ultimately responsible for the company's failure. At the time, Sir Philip pledged to sort the pension deficit, but hasn't yet said how.
I'm just amazed that before now he hasn't realised the capital to pay the pension debt that he owes every person who worked loyally for him at BHS. And I think it will go now, the bill will go way beyond 3 yachts.
Sir Philip has spent the last month on one of his 3 boats off the coast of Greece, refusing interview requests. Tonight, sources close to the billionaire said detailed, complex negotiations with the pensions regulator continue, but that a final settlement is months away. Joel Hills, News at 10.
There are moments when it's hard to get your head around the kind of hell Syria has progressively descended into these past 5.5 years. And yes, it has been that long. One particularly grim aspect of the war has been the claim that both sides have used chemical weapons on their own people. The last person confirmed to have used them, just for a sense of context, by the UN was Saddam Hussein. And today the UN confirmed 2 chemical attacks by the Assad regime, one last year, another the year before, and it also confirmed one by so-called Islamic State. And yet, weapons experts and doctors on the ground have told us that there have, in fact, been many more than that, perhaps as many as 100 in all.
It is a dirty war that deliberately targets civilians with chemicals dropped from the sky, weapons whose use is banned by international law, that leave survivors traumatised as well as struggling to breathe. Yet this is the war Bashar Assad is waging on his own people. The UN say the evidence is now undeniable. A year-long UN investigation says it was industrial chlorine and ammonia dropped onto the rebel-held Tel Amenez district of Idlib in 2014 that caused this suffering, as well as taking lives.
Oh, wow. Very high ammonia.
Many of the UN's conclusions are based on the work of this man, Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, a former British Army officer and chemical weapons expert, who visited the area after the attack to collect the evidence. Today, at home, he says the full scale of chemical use is only now becoming clear.
The UN report only directs for absolute certainty that Assad used chemical weapons twice. However, I've personally investigated another 12 very similar instances, and I've seen at least 100 reported in the media and on social media. Assad seems to use chemical weapons as a last-ditched effort when his back is absolutely against the wall.
The UN believed this was the most deadly use of chemical weapons, dropped onto suburbs of Damascus by government forces 3 years ago. Their latest scientific analysis identifies 2 more recent attacks, with more than 100 other alleged uses of these illegal weapons still being investigated. Hamish de Bretton-Gordon says the UN could and should stop the killing.
All these chlorine barrel bombs, these napalm bombs, and also these high explosive bombs are dropped from Syrian helicopters. And I firmly believe if we put a no-fly zone for helicopters over civilian areas, we will stop this straight away and no more people will needlessly die.
Without such action, doctors in desperate places like Aleppo say civilians, many of them children, continue to arrive at their doors suffering from chemical poisoning. This, they claim, is the aftermath of the most recent alleged use of chlorine 14 days ago. Paul Davis, News at 10.
If you were watching last night, you will recall that whilst we were on air, it became clear that 5 young men had lost their lives in the sea on the East Sussex coast at Camber Sands near Rye. It seemed perplexing, to say the least, but today we've learned more about who they were. They were childhood friends, including 2 brothers. They'd driven from their homes in South London for a day on the beach. Relatives say they could swim, and it seems they may have been caught out by the speed of the incoming tide.
Camber Sands was once again packed with families, enjoying a day at the beach. Only police patrols hinting at the tragedy that had unfolded in the water here just 24 hours earlier, when 5 young men lost their lives despite being able to swim. They were named tonight as brothers Kennigan and Kobe Nathan, who were 19 and 22, and their friends Indusan Shri, Kurushant Shrithivaraja and Natharsan Ravi. They'd come for a day trip from London but never made it home. Mr. Ravi's brother told ITV News the family was struggling with his loss.
It's like a black day for us. So literally everyone's stone cold, as in like we don't know what exactly to do, because we feel like the people are next to us, they are with us, but at the end they lost their lives in the ocean.
The sea looks serene today, as it did when it claimed the men's lives. But these calm waters belie the hidden dangers of a strong current. And that's what police believe the 5 friends were caught up in. James Hyatt has been running a cafe here for more than 30 years and knows the risks.
If you look out to sea there now, you'll see there's gullies that run out there, and that makes a difference of 2 or 3 feet. And if you're the other side of that and you've got an incoming tide, when you want to come back, you may be in 4 foot of water, but then all of a sudden you're in 7 foot. And if you're only 6'2" or 5'8", your head's going to go below it.
Camber Sands is one of Britain's most popular beaches, but there are now concerns over its safety. Only last month, another swimmer died here. As a result, tonight the RNLI is revising its advice for not only this stretch of beach, but all beaches.
What we would encourage people to do is make sure they are trying to choose a life-guided beach when they head to the coast. There are plenty to choose from, and when you're there, swim between the red and yellow flags. That means you've got a trained professional on hand to respond if there is an emergency.
With 6 deaths here in the last month and a further 7 around the UK's coastline, visitors are being urged to stay safe at the seaside. Sejal Karia, News at 10, Camber Sands.
And there is some advice over on our website on how to stay safe on Britain's beaches from the Royal National Lifeboat Institution. And it says what you need to know about where it's all right to swim. Probably worth looking at, given that it looks like we will have another nice weekend. Now, whilst Mr Farage was making headlines in the US, as we mentioned earlier, the 5 UKIP politicians standing for his job were holding their final hustings tonight. It is probably fair to say his are quite big shoes to fill. Leather brogues, usually, if you're interested. Those hoping to replace him are not yet household names, of course, but it's also fair to say there are a few colourful characters among them. Philip Broughton, for instance, a former Tory councillor who, outside politics, is an amateur wrestler. Yes, he is. Bill Etheridge, an MEP who has described the party as being too safe in the past and has suggested prisoners should be charged $40,000 a year for their upkeep. Lisa Duffy, a councillor who was virtually unknown before several senior party members backed her and who's promised to ban the veil in public places. Elizabeth Jones, who says she wants to unify the party but is perhaps most famous for losing her temper during a radio interview. And last but not least, Diane James, the favourite in many eyes, who has point-blank refused to attend a single hustings. But then, what kind of leader does UKIP need now that Brexit is in the process of being achieved?
On the Doncaster fruit and veg stands, they pride themselves on a bargain.
Local gold strawberry now £2 for a pound.
But for a long time, the political market here was far less competitive. Labour dominated until UKIP set up stall.
Have one of them, please.
Yep, no problem.
Doncaster is now one of its biggest branches. There are members all over this market selling the party.
Thank you. Cheers. Labour's ignored your working class for years. They've taken them for granted. The Tories tend to trample all over them, and I think the UKIP could replace them and support them.
UKIP members here did secure one of the biggest Brexit votes in the country, but that does beg the question of whether the party's job is done.
You've won your referendum. What is the purpose of UKIP now?
But the purpose of UKIP is to go forward now.
What does that mean, though, go forward?
Go forward, we've got to put pressure on this government. Brexit hasn't happened yet. We've got to make sure it does happen.
69% voted for Brexit, and yet the Labour MPs were peddling the Remain vote. So, I mean, they've not listened to what the Doncaster people have told them, what they want.
So you think that's the gap now for UKIP?
To go through for the working class, yes.
Here's a fact. Nigel Farage resigned, the referendum's over, we've got Brexit, yet our membership's gone up in Doncaster.
Yes,
does that tell you something?
Yes.
It was in Doncaster 2 years ago that Nigel Farage promised to park UKIP's tanks on Labour's lawn. He has made it the second biggest force across much of the north of England. But now UKIP members have got to trust a new leader to redefine what it is the party's fighting for. For weeks, the candidates have been holding hustings.
There's only one game now for UKIP, Westminster.
Let's change British politics
and rescue our country.
But they finished tonight with little sense of any policies. The man who first founded UKIP in the early 90s says it's time the party dissolved.
The real problem is, what do they stand for? And we don't know. And none of the candidates are known. None of their policy agendas are known. Is UKIP a right-wing party, a left-wing party, a centre party? We've got to ask ourselves these questions, but I simply don't know.
260 then, please.
When the next leader takes over in September, they may find a new selling point.
Almost for a pound mushroom.
But UKIP wouldn't be the first party to lose its position in the marketplace. Paul Brand, News at 10, Doncaster. And before we leave politics altogether, just time to show that neither side in the Jeremy Corbyn train seat saga bears any grudges. Mr Corbyn was back on a Virgin train today. There he is with a couple of young selfie hunters on today's London to Glasgow service, and Virgin showed there were no hard feelings on its side either, tweeting, "Welcome on board. Hope you all have a great trip to Glasgow this morning." Brings a lump to your throat, doesn't it? The power of reconciliation. Anyway, in tens of thousands of homes, 16 and 17-year-olds have been celebrating or muttering whatever after GCSE results came out this morning in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Crossroads reached futures clearer. I hope if you were one of those households, it was a good day for you. But actually, the rate of good passes, A star to C, fell slightly to 66.9%, its lowest level since 2008, mainly because today's results included those pupils in England who had to retake their English and maths because they didn't get a C grade or above last time. The gender gap also widened a bit further, with 71.3% of entries by girls getting a C grade or above, compared with 62.4% of boys. Now, among the results today, we had a reminder that not all these stories are equal. One waiting with particularly bated breath this morning was Mazoon El-Malehan, one of the first Syrian refugees allowed into the UK last year. She and her family arrived in Newcastle in November. It was shockingly cold, she said, and not just in Newcastle. But we have given her a safe haven and the chance to realise her dream, to actually sit and pass exams. This is the Zatari refugee camp in Jordan. Better than the civil war in Syria, perhaps, but not exactly the life any of us dreams of. But even in this dusty wasteland, you can't stop people dreaming. And for one young girl who'd fled Syria with nothing but a bag of heavy school books, that meant the chance to actually sit down one day and take some exams. In the end, Mazoon El-Malehan and her family found refuge here in Newcastle, a city that welcomed in some of the refugees. She found the cold a little arresting. Who wouldn't? But it did give her a chance to realise that dream.
Thank you.
So perhaps no surprise then that she awoke this morning with particularly bated breath for her moment of truth.
When I will come back, my parents and my siblings, they will be so happy for me. They will celebrate for me. They will say to me, congrats. And that's a lovely thing for your family to see, to be proud of you.
Mazoon became known as the Syrian Malala for her work encouraging other girls in the refugee camps to prioritise their education. In fact, Malala went to visit Mazoon in Jordan and the two became close. When she arrived in the UK, Malala was one of the first to welcome her here, and today she tweeted her congratulations. So proud of her, she said. So what next for Mazoon after these results? Well, it appears a career in journalism might beckon.
It's open to you many doors to help others around the world to get in many, to know many cultures, many traditions. It is a lovely thing to work in media. Also, the media, it's important in many things to raise the voices of people around the world.
And who can argue with that? So let's just take a quick look at what might be happening tomorrow. We will, of course, be reporting further from Italy's earthquake zone as the search for survivors and bodies continues into another night. We'll, of course, be outside the hospital too to talk about that poor British couple who lost their son but survived. There will be a meeting between American Secretary of State John Kerry and Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to discuss Syria. That's happening in Geneva. Hopes are pinned on them for some kind of ceasefire in the besieged city of Aleppo at least for 48 hours, perhaps, to try and get some aid in there. And it is 3 months now since the ban on legal highs. Figures are due out which show how many shops have shut and how many people have been arrested. And
Just a reminder, actually, that it really is worth going, particularly given that, as I said earlier, it looks like being a nice weekend. It is worth going and looking at our website for just a reminder of safety procedure on beaches. That is it from me. Good night, and thank you very much for watching.